Well, Tamina, it is so wonderful to have you on the Formidable podcast today. Thanks for
Thank you
joining
so much
us.
for having me. I feel very formidable.
You absolutely are. No, it's great to have you here. I wanted to start off by just asking you a little bit about personally how you got into immigration law. What attracted you to this particular specialty?
It's a really great question because I fell into immigration law, and in fact, I got into it kicking and screaming. It was the one area of law I didn't want to practice. I moved from the United Kingdom when I had my own sleepless in Seattle moment with my husband. And then when I finally moved here, I didn't have the license for Washington State. I had a New York lawyer's license. And that led me into a limited capacity in what I could practice. And immigration kept following my path, and I kept saying, no, thank you, no, thank you. I thought it would be asylum work day in, day out, pulling at my heartstrings. And eventually I realized I have to say yes because I'm not getting anything else to do. And that's, the moment I said yes was such a blessing. It was almost like the universe kept throwing it at me until I succumbed. And here I am. I have not looked back.
That's a great story. Well, I know that you've spent some time in this practice now and become something of an expert on the law. So, give us a state of the union on where we're at right now when it comes to immigration. What are the key issues, and what are you watching most closely?
Wow, I love the question of State of the Union. I'm going to have to take that from you. Where do we stand on immigration? And I tell people to think of immigration as three buckets: legal immigration bucket, or business immigration bucket, family immigration bucket, and the rest of it, asylum, humanitarian issues. And each of these buckets have their own stories, and they have their own issues and State of the Union, if you like. Now, from a business immigration, that's what I practice. We have, by the way, before I talk about individually, holistically, we have needed immigration reform for decades. And you yourself have done so much reporting on this issue. You have dug through each of the issues. You went to Canada, you went to all these places to report on these issues. And I have always felt grateful that you did that because it showed what we were lacking in the United States and we continue to lack. So, from a holistic perspective, our procedures, our system are broken. Our laws are so old. They were from 1950s and 60s, with the only real change in 1990 that created the business immigration preference, the visa system. And since those times, the world has evolved infinitely. Our technology revolution alone has created jobs and requires people to be closer to each other, and the economy relies on immigration. What people don't understand is immigration is synonymous with the economy, yet the layperson who is emotionally charged by news will think immigration is about divisiveness and borders. And it's not just that. So, what I tell people is if you look at your phone alone, just look at your cell phone, the network, the hardware, the software, all of these things are being operated or maintained by a large group of high skilled immigrants in the United States. And so, holistically, we have needed immigration reform, and it continues to fail when it gets to Congress. So, what do we need in these three buckets? From a legal immigration perspective, we need new visa categories. You have in the past reported on startup visas, visas that are for entrepreneurs, but we also need a visa category for low skilled workers. If you look at the hospitality industry, the nursing care industry, all of these small mom and pop businesses, if you like, do not have enough workers. But who are they serving? They're serving us, the American consumer. And so they cannot serve us, therefore we lose out. So we need these two major visa categories, but within those categories and within legal immigration, we need reform in each of the categories in a systematic approach. For example, we have a huge backlog of people waiting in the green card queue, so to speak, from a legal immigration perspective. And that includes a lot of people from China, India, Mexico, Philippines, but really from all over the world. And ultimately, that hinders our economic growth. So we need that's just a handful of things to mention on the legal immigration front. When it comes to family immigration, we have backlogs as well. We don't have enough categories, preference categories, to make sure that families can be united. And what's interesting is the previous administration had really used this word chain migration when it came to family based immigration. It really is a misrepresentation of what family immigration really is about. In the 1950s and 60s, when immigration reform actually happened, family unity was actually given a lot of time and value in creating those laws. And what's happening now is families are always, waiting, you know, across the world for each other. So we need to fix that. And then when it comes to humanitarian immigration, which includes the border, which includes, asylum and trafficking and what have you, all of these need systematic approaches individually for each category, but holistically as well. So if there was one word that I had to share, one phrase, it's immigration reform.
So, Tamina, thank you for that. When it comes to immigration reform, why does this keep getting stalled? Obviously, it's a political football, but what is it about comprehensive immigration reform that keeps getting stalled?
I have actually been thinking about this a lot, particularly in the last 7 days, about how to approach this question, because there are a lot of immigration is going to be a headliner for the next 4 months, and it will continue to be a headliner depending on who's in office. And immigration reform, again, coming back to the economy, is synonymous with that. Our economy needs workers. If you look at the various policies that the Biden-Harris administration has put in place, looking at what is going on as trending items, AI, we're not going to get away from that. AI is just will continue to be part of our lives in every way that we can't even imagine. And we need workers and skills for that. That AI executive order alone needs immigrants. When you think about the Chips and Science Act that was passed, that is going to make such impactful growth for America, you need people to implement the work that needs to happen. We need immigrants for that. So why hasn't immigration reform happened? Over the years, at least the last 3 decades, and you mentioned political football, the ball just keeps getting bigger and bigger and easier to throw around, because it's a divisive topic. It's emotional. It gets votes for people. And if you solve it, how are you going to get the votes? And so I think, politically speaking, because there's such a divide between the two parties we have in this country, it's very difficult, at least from an immigration lawyer's perspective, to see how we move forward unless we have a Congress that really wants the best for our country. And we are electing these officials to represent us, but are they really representing us? It's very hard to know. It seems to be that there are, agendas within those representatives. And I had long concluded that the people on the ground are misinformed. And it's because of the misinformation, they are being continuously fed this misinformation, and that's how these votes are happening. And podcasts like yours, Emily, are so important, because educating the public on what the real deal is, what the layman should know, is important, because it has a ripple effect on how they're voting and who they're voting for. So why hasn't it happened? Just let's talk about the last 4 years. When President Biden came into office, within the first few weeks, he had submitted an immigration reform proposal to Congress. It wasn't even given any time in the day. just in the last 18 months, I believe. Time is a blur. Um, but there were a lot of discussions, and it seemed there was positive, you know, progress towards immigration reform. Maybe not immigration reform as a comprehensive issue, but what to do with the border and what to do with some specific issues. And they got derailed because the former president had convinced the current Congress people not to act on it because it is a political football. And so we have to get away from that notion that it is divisive and it is not good for us, because it is good for us. There is a ripple effect to immigration reform happening. And look, we all have, futures to think about. We have, many of us have children that we need to think about for their futures. Are they going to get jobs? What kind of country are they going to live in? And while there are many components to that notion, immigration is a big one.
Thank you for that. I want to drill down just a little bit on what you said, Tamina, because I think it's really interesting. And um, the research that I've done shows that basically the U.S.'s birth rate is falling, and really the only way to keep the economy going is immigration, right? We need to bring in more people to do the work that's necessary, like you were talking about. But there is this, this sort of public perception that immigrants take jobs, right? Take American jobs. Can you talk a little bit about the perception versus reality around that?
Yes, that is an excellent question. First of all, people just need to look at the openings at Microsoft or Amazon or wherever to see how many jobs are actually available. There are millions of jobs available, and these companies cannot fill them. But when it comes to immigrants, there is a multiplier effect. When an immigrant comes into the US and they have a job, this misconception that an American job is taken away or an American worker's wages are depressed, neither of those are true. Because when that person has a job, the ripple effect. I love using the word ripple, the phrase ripple effect, because it really is that. Because from that person's job, let's just take H-1B workers as an example. One H-1B worker has a multiplier of 7, I believe. And what happens is, just so I can break it down even further, one person comes into the US, and Microsoft rolls off the tongue because we're here in Seattle. They work at Microsoft, but now they need an accountant, they need a doctor, they need often people with their houses might need a gardener, or nannies. They need their laundry done. There are skilled professional jobs that are created, but there are also unskilled jobs that are created, and that keeps growing. So this notion that jobs are being taken away is completely false. And people just need to open their hearts to learn, and they don't necessarily need to you know they can, the information is right there in the public. Go to these organizations that are reporting on these issues. There's Cato, Cato. They do a lot of research. There's the Niskanen Center. They have a lot of research. There's the American Immigration Council. There are reports in every industry: entrepreneurship, agriculture, even specifically about dairy, for example. Students. You think about the international students that come here. America is known for the universities and the education that we provide. And it's a circular problem because a lot of Americans cannot actually afford the education that we can provide. But foreign students are paying for that education, and those schools. Those schools survive because of the international students that we get here. And they are doing the subjects that American students often don't want to do, like engineering, like math. Reports will show that American students who do go to school, majority of them do finance or art related subject matters. So the workforce that we are creating is not the right kind of workforce that we need. And so it is really important to understand the bigger picture of what's going on in this country. And everything is connected: our education system, our health system, our immigration system. You have to reform all of these things to some extent. But if we think about the workforce, there are multiple ways in which we need to grow it. And immigrants are not taking the jobs for those, the misconception that is out there.
That's really interesting. I want to shift gears just a little bit and talk about entrepreneurship and the startup visa concept, which is something of a focus area for you. Um, where are, you're working with a lot of clients in this space. Where are their heads at right now in terms of immigrating into the US to start their companies? Are there other countries that are being more welcoming to entrepreneurs right now? Are we at risk of losing out on some of the next and greatest ideas coming out of this population? Maybe talk a little bit about that concept in particular, and what the US has at stake.
America can actually make people's dreams come true. And that has always been true, and it remains true. And because of that, people want to come to America. Now, those who are coming from faraway countries are not necessarily thinking about the politics of the country. They're thinking about the resources that are available, the investors that are available, the consumers that are available. If you can make it in America, chances are your product is going to make it around the world. So it will always be that the American dream is true. Now, let's talk about entrepreneurs in like two categories: the budding entrepreneurs from schools and the people who are already here who are now wanting to get into entrepreneurship. When it comes to schools, whether it's Berkeley, Stanford, Columbia, New York, University of Washington, you name it, people are coming. We just talked about students. We are producing the brains of the next generation. Our immigration system is flawed. And these people who want to stay here might want to work at a big company, but a lot of them also want to pursue entrepreneurship. Our visa categories have not allowed people who graduate to stay here automatically. It's been, the first time I remember hearing it is when Michael Bloomberg, when he was a mayor all those years ago, said every student who graduates should get a green card stapled in their passport. And just recently, the former president mentioned it. I don't know if it's just a gimmick, but it's important to recognize the value and the potential that international students bring into regular jobs, but also entrepreneurship. And so other countries, what are they doing? The United Kingdom, in the last 12-18 months, time is a blur again, they created a policy saying, if you were a graduate from any of these schools, and 90% of them were US schools. I think they just put in a few just so it doesn't look like they're poaching US students. They said, we will not ask any questions. If you graduated from these schools, just come over. Because they recognize the value that these students will bring to their countries. Canada has sought students, Europe, many countries have created programs like that, but the stark one was really the United Kingdom in the last few months, and it has worked. They've taken a lot of the students who are like, I can just, if I'm great at what I do, I can do it anywhere, especially if a country is rolling out a red carpet. So that's on the international student front. But what about the people who are already here and let's say they've worked a lot in different companies and now they have these brilliant ideas? How do they stay? Often people will get an H-1B visa and they will continuously work as an employee while having this innate desire to be an entrepreneur, but the immigration process is not allowing for it. But if you think about companies suddenly laying off hundreds of thousands of people, which puts their visas and green cards at stake. Yet they've had their careers in this country. Suddenly they're thinking, can I have my own thing, my own business? And I did a lot of workshops for people who are laid off, encouraging them to take immigration into their own hands and say, have your own business. So, and we will figure out how to make the immigration work. Even though we do not have a startup visa, we have visas that can work for startups. And that's what I've been doing all these years. But what did Canada do when they saw our fall? They created a new visa program called H-1B visas. And they took those H-1B workers who were laid off and took them to their own country. They had opened the slots, and within 48 hours, they were full. I think it was 10,000 plus people. But think about what that did for us. If you think about Amazon or Microsoft or some of these big companies, they often will have non-competes that, you cannot take our secret sauce and have it somewhere else. So often people who have come out of these companies are limited in where they can go. But that does not apply to another jurisdiction. So now if you've gone to another country, what's happened? That secret sauce is gone with them. And what's going to happen to that country? They're going to continue to flourish. And so Canada is absolutely one of the most welcoming countries for immigrants, not just entrepreneurs, but you name it, they recognize the value. United Kingdom, I mentioned, but there are other countries. Australia recently had a complete overhaul in their immigration system. Germany did that. The entire world is realizing that with the evolution and revolution of technology, if you are not having the workers who can do this work, your country is going to be left behind. And this is where we stand at the moment. Everybody wants to come to the United States, yet United States is putting a wall up and other countries are taking advantage of it.
It's interesting that you bring up the H-1B, the work that Canada's done. Obviously, I'm somewhat familiar with that because I did some reporting on it, but it's been a little while.
You might have to go back.
Has that situation apparently has that situation changed at all? Obviously, the layoffs here in the United States do change that dynamic a little bit, and it sounds like Canada has welcomed folks with open arms. But the caps remain the same here, right? In terms of the number of H-1B visas issued. I looked, and it looked like, was it 3/4 of the people who applied for H-1Bs this year were rejected? So that's a huge chunk of people. One would assume very talented and smart, well-educated folks who are being turned away. Where are they going?
Really good question. I hope somebody is able to do some sort of survey of where they're going, but a lot of people do go to Canada. But let's talk about the H-1B system for just a moment. That was one of the 1990s, reforms that we had, creating this visa category. And it went through a few, different, quotas, and it landed on 85,000. For people who don't know, 85,000 visas are given out each year. 65,000 are for people who have a bachelor's degree, or you have a master's degree from a different country, but a bachelor's degree. And if you have a master's degree from a U.S. school, accredited school, then you can be part of the 20,000 that's put aside. The previous administration had made some changes to the program. And before those changes, there was 1 in 3 chances of being selected. When those changes came in, fraud went up. It became an electronic system. You pay only $10 to be in the lottery. And guess what? Those bad apples who wanted to game the system really gamed it. And it turned out that not last year, but this year, but the year before, the government received almost 800,000 applications for 85,000. If you think about that number, how many people actually got selected of those? And how many of them were real? So this year, the Biden administration actually changed through regulation what that would look like. And that, had an impact on not having those fraudulent cases. But the administration is actually taking the opportunity to overhaul some of the H-1B regulations that haven't been touched since implementation. And some of them can be good, but some of them will restrict the program even more. Any day now, we will be seeing what those new regulations will look like. And it gives me the heebie jeebies a little bit, because the foundation of an H-1B is you have a degree that matches the job you're going to do. And often those degrees can be related. You are going to be a computer engineer. You can have a maths degree, a computer science degree, an information, technology degree. You can have related degrees. But sometimes, if you're a financial analyst, you could be having a finance degree, an economics degree, a math degree. Sometimes you may not have quite the right degree, but you have had experience over the course of time, and that experience could be evaluated to say this is the degree that matches the job. There's going to be a shift in how that analysis is done, and that could affect a lot of people. Now, the proposed rules were out, the final, and a lot of comments were made. It also affects entrepreneurs. There's a section of H-1Bs that are not in the lottery that might have a good outcome. That's when universities, nonprofits, and research organizations apply for H-1Bs. We have to wait and see what happens. There could be, my fear is that this administration could make some huge changes, and then if the election goes in the wrong direction, then the new rules would be in the wrong hands to further restrict the H-1B program, which is no secret that the other side doesn't like. And so it's going to be an interesting time to keep an eye on the H-1B visa category. And if you do go to Canada to look at this, I would love to know what you're doing and maybe even join you on that excursion.
Absolutely, that would be a fun trip. Talk to some really interesting people, I'm sure. It's interesting you bring up the differences between the administrations. One of the things that Donald Trump's campaign has said recently is that he wants to end the birthright law that grants citizenship to a person when they're born in the United States. Is there a legal path forward for that? Is that even possible?
It's a constitutional amendment, and if depending on who leads the House and Senate, who knows? I mean, I think when all of these discussions happened during the campaign trail last time, I think many of us didn't believe any of it. We didn't believe they could have a ban in, a 21st century. We didn't believe that they could curtail immigration without immigration reform. But what we saw was from day one, they had, executive orders, and those led to policies that restricted everything. They denied H-1Bs left and right. They denied O visas. They denied everything. They made changes to student visas. They obviously had a ban. They were able to, one of the things I have said a lot is COVID gave Trump what Congress didn't give him. And COVID gave him the bans he wanted. There was a complete ban on family-based immigration, which he had said over and over again, I don't want chain immigration. And chain immigration is such a derogatory word, a phrase, but he couldn't stop it. And COVID inherently made all these consulates stop their work. They couldn't do the work. So there was no need to actually have a ban on paper in writing, because practically it was not possible. But he used that opportunity to create the ban that he had promised his followers. And that created an enormous backlog that the Biden administration has only just tried to be, coming out of still. So when it comes to the birthright issue, there were two things that were very, very disturbing in the last time he was in office. Number one was he wanted to take citizenship away from people, denaturalize people, and that was in progress. It was, some people had been denaturalized for whatever reason, and it's not easy to do. but they had done it for some people and they were on a mission to do more. And so next time if he's in office, I suspect they will pick that up. And the birthright citizenship that was floated many, many times, and none of us believed it could happen. But I don't think we should sit back and say, no, it can't happen, because he will find a way. And just this week on the campaign trail, which has, caused a lot of fear among people, that he said, well, you don't have to vote, just vote this time and you don't have to vote again. What does that mean? It means that changes like birthright citizenship could happen with a check mark of a pen. And so I think it's important that all of us who are voters, who are influencers, who are able to educate, is that we do educate our neighbors, our friends, on don't just dismiss anything anymore. Dismissing any type of rhetoric that comes from that campaign is going to cost us, and we need to be vigilant.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things I wanted to dive into a little bit, now that we're getting a little political, is the Biden administration has actually deported more people than Trump did during his term. Give us sort of a sense of how the Biden administration has been, and if you have any sense from what Harris has said so far, where you think that will go if she were to win in the fall.
I think that's the $1,000,000 question that everyone is thinking about. And I want to start by saying when the Biden-Harris administration came into office, they had a broken system that was trampled on to almost non-existent. It was trampled on at the border. It was trampled on at the USCIS level. That's the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services level. It was trampled on at the DHS level. The DHS was run by people who were not actually confirmed by Congress. And so they were able to use an executive order and then have policy and have leaders who were not necessarily confirmed. And they created so much havoc without congressional input. And so what did that leave us with? And let's not forget, we had a pandemic that shut down life in all respect for all of us. Many of us became Zoom teachers for our children with no experience, realizing how important teachers are in our country, who don't get paid enough. I digress. But when it comes to the border, that system has needed reform for decades. And we just talked about how, Congress hasn't brought any reform for a long time. It's important to know that they did what they could, even though it's very controversial. A lot of immigration reform, immigrant advocacy groups have condemned what the administration has done at the border. I think it was necessary in many ways for them to do what they did, because we don't have enough workforce either. The system is still broken, and so what are they doing? They're doing things that trying to have meaningful impact. So Vice President Harris was tasked with seeing the root causes of what's happening. She did that. She went to Latin America. She would talk to the country leaders. She was able to get investment into those countries. It's not that she didn't do what she needed to do, but it's not a problem that she created or a problem that hasn't existed before. It didn't just show up one day. It's needed that. I mean, President Obama was actually referred to as deporter in chief because he deported a lot of people. But nobody snatched babies away from their parents until Donald Trump came into office. And so when it comes to the border, it comes back to immigration reform is absolutely necessary. And we need to have systems in place that allows the people who are truly in fear of their lives to be in the US. We are part of international treaties. We are part of the Human Rights Convention. We are not always following that. And we need to be able to abide by our duties as an international community to preserve lives of people. Every life matters, no matter where you are in the world.
It's a great message. Well, that kind of brings me to a question I wanted to ask you. You know, when I was reporting on this years ago, one of my goals was to put a human face on the issue and tell the stories, individual stories. Are there any stories you can share, even sort of from a high level, of people navigating this convoluted immigration process that we have, and what this means for families and individuals who are trying to go through it?
Absolutely. One of the things that, and you may remember this, is that a lot of people don't want to actually come forward and put their face. And it's been challenging to get people to speak, but I have been sharing their stories through my column in Above the Law. I've written many stories disguising names and putting different scenarios with the different problems that we have in immigration. But two of the good things that have happened in the last few weeks is the Biden administration said we are going to allow work permits for undocumented spouses of US citizens. And that is huge. We are still waiting for some information, policies and procedures. That's going to come down soon. But also, they said we are going to allow DACA folks to be able to get work permits, I mean, visas. Now, the the DACA, let me just step back a little bit and explain what that is, just so your listeners can understand it. In 2012, President Obama said that if you were brought to the United States as a child, um, illegally or legally, and you have become out of status, we will allow you to have a work permit. That is deferred action for childhood arrival. Um, President Trump stopped new applications. You can't file new ones, but those who have DACA since then can continue to renew it. But that is not status. It is not status to get a green card. You still need a bridge to get to that green card. This administration is taking that one step further, saying we will allow you to have a work permit, and they're creating those procedures for it. So, one face for this story. And I've written about this person, and I'm hoping this person will come in front of cameras at some point. But this person was brought as a child to the United States. They are in Washington State, in a rural area, and they have created this company, a trucking company actually, that is now worth millions and millions and millions. And if you remember what happened during the pandemic, we did not have enough truckers. We didn't it's one of those things that you don't think about until there's a problem, because everything is going smoothly. But how important did they become, and the realization that we had as Americans, that oh my gosh, those trucks that annoy us when we're driving and we have to sort of like somehow cross over on the freeway, boy, are they important for us to get our toilet paper or whatever, you know. This is the type of important work that this individual has been doing, but in the process also creating hundreds of jobs directly and indirectly. This person's potential can be, you know, the sky is the limit for this person, but for not having status. So through this change that the Biden administration will bring, Biden Harris administration will bring, will allow this person and many others like him to have permanent status in the US eventually. And that's the navigation that people are trying to get through. For this person, I spent so many hours seeing how can I find a path for this person. This person is so deserving, but the law is broken. And if the law is broken, I could be researching 24/7. But if the law is not fixed, I will not find a solution. And that's what we need.
Thank you for sharing that. Well, last question for you, Tahmina, before I let you go. How do you stay hopeful through all of this? There's so much to be frustrated by, and you haven't seen the kind of change that I think a lot of folks have been looking for decades. How do you stay hopeful? How do you stay focused on the future?
I think we all need to always have hope. Otherwise, you cannot put one foot in front of another. But what I've also realized is that I have had to focus on my own joy, because it is difficult to find hope when there is no hope. But if you can find the joy in the little things in life, hope sort of stems from that. And for me, that has been bird watching and bird photography. It's completely left field from what we've discussed so far, but the Trump administration threw me into so many continuously stressful situations. I thought that it was a sleepless 4 years of stress, that if you have stress within you, you take it everywhere you go. And if you're taking your work home to your children, everybody's stressed within that environment. So I had to figure out how I could deal with my stress. And the pandemic, in a very disguised way, allowed me to find the joy in nature and wildlife and birds. And every time I'm looking at these birds and wildlife, who, I've just discovered a new National Geographic TV show on Hulu that goes through the national parks. And it's a bit like, oh, you're trying to be David Attenborough. Okay, but I'll take you, you know. But it goes through the national parks of the animal cycle of life, how they have to survive winter to get to the spring, to get food, to get into summer, and not be eaten in that entire process. Hope comes from what nature is doing day in and day out that we do not pay attention to. So when we are hopeless, we've got to find inspiration from somewhere. Find your own joy from wherever you can find it. For me, it's been nature, and to see what, even just the trees. If you're somebody who loves flowers, look at the way trees are, shedding their leaves to come with new leaves. It's what nature does. And of course, humans are part of nature. And so, how can we bring nature into our minds all the time to bring hope to everything that we do? So, that's how I stay hopeful in my recent new life.
Bird watching is it's very
So
zen, right? Like it's very quiet, it's very zen. What's the rarest bird you've
Oh
seen
my
so
gosh,
far?
I have so many stories to share. So I've been speaking in different countries, and I have taken some specific crazy bird trips. But first of all, I want to share that just yesterday, I figured out how to do my birding YouTube channel. I've been sitting on it for practically a year because I take these videos and I'm like, oh, this is for me. And I realize I'm going to these far corners of the world, and people need to get healed and see these beauties. So I've been sitting on them, but I just started put my videos onto this channel called Birding Immigration Lawyer YouTube channel. And so that's how crazy and passionate I am. But I took a day off to go to Alaska, and Alaska had a white raven that was only there in Anchorage for a few weeks. And I managed to just fly in first thing in the morning, not realizing there was going to be a snowstorm. And I managed to find the bird. I had a 10-minute window of seeing the bird, saw it, and then came home that evening. But I met many people who said, I haven't seen the white, raven yet. So I felt very lucky. I just went to Hawaii, and I took a trip to Molokini Bird Sanctuary under the disguise of a snorkeling trip, but I did not snorkel. And I just stood there and I took bird pictures. It happened to break my camera, but I saw these frigate birds that normally look like a tiny little ant when you're standing on the ground because they fly so high up. But Molokini Crater is the bird sanctuary where these birds roost and nest and fly quite close by. So I saw that. I've seen so many at this point that now I'm going on a puffin trip next week in Maine. I'm going there to pick up my child who's been doing a summer camp. So I'm like, what birds around this area are around this area? So I found that there are puffins. So yeah, I mean, it's just transformed my life. And what's happened is I am a much better human being in all aspects of my life. And this notion that I had that I don't have time for things like this, who has time for a hobby? Oh my gosh, I'm the biggest person that is demonstrating dispelling of that myth. Because if you love something and you care about something so much, you will find the time to do it.
What a great message. And I love that you're doing that. I'm from Maine.
No
I've seen the
way!
puffins. It's really
I did not
special.
know that. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. And by the time I booked my trip, I did not know how popular those trips are. There's only one company that is allowed to take people onto the island that has the birds, the puffins. There are other companies that, sail around it, but only one can go onto the island. I lost out on that one this time. But I'm like, okay, mental note, if I have to do this again, book it, 2 years in advance.
Oh, it's amazing. You're gonna have so
Oh,
much fun.
well,
It's
offline, you'll have
beautiful.
to give me
It's
some
really
tips.
beautiful. I will. I will. Well, Tamina, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a fascinating conversation, and I wish you the best of luck with everything that you've got in
Thank you
front of
so
you.
much. And thank you for all that you are doing. I say to people, you're the woman behind women. And I'm just so grateful that I can call you my friend and I know you. And congratulations on what you're doing. And I hope every success through this platform.